right now.
From an outsider's perspective, Jordan, are you a spiritual Brexiteer?
I have some sympathy with people's desire to disentangle themselves from rulers who are too far away in the power hierarchy from them.
What a good point.
Why?
Well, because as people move away from you up hierarchies, it's harder and harder for them to represent you properly at a local level. And I also have a tremendous amount of faith, I would say, all things considered, in the people of the UK to muddle through properly, because they've been doing that for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So, I'd bet, my sense as a Canadian is that I'd bet on Britain.
All right. But then your colleagues in Canada have lost the argument.
No, because we've just heard from Stephen what he's said, and I think he's right. We've just heard from the Prime Minister too. But there is another factor which hasn't yet been mentioned, and that is that this backstop is part of a draft agreement that was prepared as a result of a meeting on the 8th of December last year. We've heard Coveney refer to it, Varadkar and all the rest of it.
Let's just explain what that backstop is.
Yes.
Tell the viewers exactly what it means.
Well, what it means is that there is a final option C, which they say would mean that we would have to fit in with the regulatory alignment of the customs union in relation to the Irish north and south.
In order to keep it frictionless.
In order to keep it frictionless.
Right.
However, the fact is that that agreement is not a legally binding document. It is not yet part of the withdrawal agreement.
Right.
And it is, we had a meeting yesterday with Karen Bradley, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, in front of my committee, the European Scrutiny Committee, and we went into all this. And the plain fact is that it is not binding. And it may be that there are people talking about it, but it is not a binding agreement.
Right, but the fact that it's not
so
binding...
option C is not actually binding on the United Kingdom.
But it is an option, isn't it, Bill Cash?
It's something that's being talked about, but nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
No, but it is an option. And it's an option that you don't support, and nor do many of you.
I certainly don't.
Right.
No, I don't like the idea, but the fact is that what is an idea is not necessarily an obligation.
Right.
And there is no obligation. There are loads of things, Joe, that are being discussed at the moment with contrary views as to whether they're good ideas or not. The question is what will actually happen.
Yes.
And that will be decided by a legal obligation in an agreement.
Right, well, let's talk about what might happen. Everybody says they want a frictionless border.
Yes.
Everybody says
and
there must be no hard infrastructure.
We've
heard
it.
Yeah, exactly.
3 cheers.
The problem is that neither of the potential solutions, the customs partnership, which you don't support, and the maximum facilitation, which everybody says at the moment is not possible.
Well,
Might be.
everybody.
Hang on, let me just finish. Let me finish. It's not possible. So the EU, many people in your party, many people across Parliament. If it's not ready, let's imagine that there is a technical. Let's imagine there's a technical solution, and it's not ready by 2020, but it's ready by 2023. So are you prepared to stay in the customs union until then?
Can I just make the point about the money, which Stephen
answer
because
that question.
If we stay in after the 30th of December 2020, in other words, on the 1st of January 2021,
yes.
a huge bill, which I've already pointed out from the European Scrutiny Committee, will mean another £5 billion.
Right, but that's not the answer to my question. Would you be prepared to do that?
Well, the short answer is I certainly don't want to, but this is an objective which is currently being discussed. We're in the business of ideas, not legal obligations at the moment. I can't make myself... We must not give in to ultimatums from Tusk, Barnier, Varadkar, Coveney. That's what they're doing.
And Remain Tory MPs.
I'm talking... yes, that could also apply.
Right. What's Labour's position? Not really that much clearer, is it?
Well, Labour have said that they would want to stay in some customs union. I mean, I think what the Prime Minister is proposing, whether it's sort of a full plan or being talked about, is broadly sensible. I mean, if you're going to have an extended period... I mean, why wouldn't you use that on a pragmatic basis? I mean,
you might never get out of it.
Well, I mean, do you know how you see it, Bill? It's almost like we're running up to the cliff edge, but we're giving ourselves a longer run-up period.
Actually, it's like an escalator. You get on the first steps and you can get off, and after that you can't.
I think we cannot underestimate the Northern Ireland situation. I think we here in London gloss over it quite lightly. So it's something can be sorted. I mean, I was in Belfast just last week, and people are raging about it. It is an issue. And we are playing with their lives and their future, the strength of the Good
There's a lot of
Friday Agreement as
There's
well.
a great deal of
well,
disinformation
I think people in
about
Northern
it.
Ireland do know what they're talking about
Well, I'm
with the
talking
greatest
to
of
Northern
respect.
Ireland people as well, and I have to also say that yesterday in the committee proceedings, we went into this, it was in public, it was on television, it's been seen by people, and the fact is that all this talk about cameras, there are cameras there already, round
But
the
you know
area.
what, Bill, that is not how people are feeling
Well,
on the ground in Northern Ireland right now.
From an outsider's perspective, Jordan, are you a spiritual Brexiteer?
I have some sympathy with people's desire to disentangle themselves from rulers who are too far away in the power hierarchy from them.
What a good point.
Why?
Well, because as people move away from you up hierarchies, it's harder and harder for them to represent you properly at a local level. And I also have a tremendous amount of faith, I would say, all things considered, in the people of the UK to muddle through properly, because they've been doing that for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd bet, my sense as a Canadian is that I'd bet on Britain.
All right. But unveiling wasn't quite the triumph that Grassroots Out would have hoped.
Not for the first time. You've misled me by asking me to come in and talk about the referendum, but instead wanting to talk about me.
I'm sure we haven't misled you. Well, hang on.
No,
I'm sure we haven't
hang
misled
on.
you.
No, I won't hang on. If you had told me that I was coming in to discuss me, I would have said there are much bigger issues that the British people are occupied by than 6 or however many vox pops you had.
But this is going on to the issue, as you say, of the referendum, because it's
let's
how
talk
powerful.
about the referendum.
All right, but
let's talk about the referendum.
Yes, but I want you to answer this. You want to defend, you know, what you're doing here.
I don't want to defend me at all. You're not my judge. You're not fit to be my judge.
Well, thank you very much. All I'm trying to say is, are you going to be a benefit to this campaign if there are people that are going to walk out?
You asked me to come in to this studio.
Yes.
I didn't ask you. You told me you wanted to hear my views on the referendum
and I do.
on the European Union. So can we move on to that, please?
Well, are you happy to link arms, to use the Prime Minister's expression,
I don't
with
link
others
arms
that you do not agree with?
I don't link arms with anybody.
Well, you are metaphorically
it's a binary choice.
Right.
You're in or you're out. The last fellow you had on who said he wouldn't share a platform with me claimed £40,000 off the taxpayer to heat his horses in a stable.
Right, well, hang on.
Would I really want to link arms with him? No. But if he can bring any no voters into the polling booth, and if I can bring any no voters into the polling booth, I hope that that will be enough.
So this issue, what we were trying to say about this whole interview is that this issue, as far as you're concerned, is bigger than people's...
It's such a childish thing.
Except...
You know, Tony Blair is for yes. Does that mean that anybody who's for yes is associated with Tony Blair? It's such childish discourse.
Right, except that political bedfellows can sometimes lead people to say, is one being authentic about the issue? If, for example, you said about Nigel Farage, his aid smear should disqualify him from any civilised company henceforth. But you're going to put that aside in order to campaign for this issue, which you think is bigger...
It's bigger than all issues.
Right,
It will affect the lives, the future of all of our people for the rest of time.
So what do you say to those people who obviously don't feel it is bigger than their personal antipathy towards you?
Well, more fool them. I hope they're not going to vote for the European Union because they don't like me. That would be a very foolish and childish thing to do.
But are you worried that you might be turning off some people who would like to support Grassroots Out?
But you asked me to come here, presumably because you thought I had something that some people might be interested to hear.
Yes, and we will get onto it, but it is important, isn't it? If you're trying to
I don't know when we'll
push...
get onto it. We're almost finished the interview.
How do you know? Might have you on here for another 10, 15 minutes.
I very much doubt that.
You're right. I'm not going to have you on for 10, 15 minutes. But if you're going to convince people of an argument, they've got to believe in the big players that are there.
Please stop this. You misled me into coming in here today, and every question you've asked has been about me. I'm campaigning amongst my 1 million followers on social media, on the radio, on the television, on platforms, on the streets, for Britain to leave for a series of important reasons to which you have not yet turned.
I will get to it if you would just answer the one question then.
No, but I don't want...
When have you ever not wanted to talk about you, George Galloway?
It's so childish. It's so tabloid. It's so Daily Mail.
God forbid we should ever be tabloid here at the BBC. Are you and Nigel Farage going to be able to attract and keep enough support for this campaign that you say is important enough to override any other personality or politics?
I don't know, because the public haven't voted yet. But I am convinced that Britain...
That's a question coming from the live chat. Yes, you can have my thoughts on Brexit, Tom. The other day I was doing a lecture on the stories in Genesis, and one of the stories that I analyzed briefly, and this will be posted very soon, is the story of the Tower of Babel. And I've been very curious about that story. It comes after Noah's flood myth in Genesis. And it's a very interesting story. And what happens is that human beings get together and they decide to build a massive building. And the human beings that are building that building all speak in one voice. And they have this grand vision, which you might regard as a utopian vision, which is what I think it is, that they can build a building so high that within it everyone will speak the same language and it will reach all the way to heaven. And so you could see it in some sense as an attempt to usurp the transcendent. I kind of read it as an early precursor of the story that Milton told in Paradise Lost, where Satan, who's God's highest heavenly angel, and who's Lucifer, the brightest light in the psychic hierarchy, you might say, and the spirit of untrammeled rationality, decides that he can wage war in heaven and overcome God, overcome the ultimate in the transcendent value. And I read that as a cautionary tale about the pride that goes along with intellectual presupposition, and the same pride that produced the totalitarian states of the 20th century. What happens with the Tower of Babel is that human beings start to build this unitary, homogeneous structure whose pinnacle will reach into God's heavenly domain, perhaps thereby taking the place of the transcendent. God gets wind of that and goes to earth and takes the people, or transforms the people who are building the building, and who in principle it would house, into a polyglot of people speaking different languages, and then scatters them all over the world. Well, what I think that means is that if you try to build a homogeneous totalitarian structure that usurps the transcendent, it will begin to badly fragment from within. And I think it's a warning against gigantism. And I think one of the things that's happening in Europe is that we're seeing the folly of the idea of too big to fail. What we're seeing instead is the manifestation of so big it will certainly fail. And I think the reason for that is that there has to be a certain degree of homogeneity within anything that can be categorized as an organization. If the degree of heterogeneity within the organization becomes too extreme, and if the organization becomes too large, then it's very difficult for people to feel any affinity with it. They're going to fragment back into their subsidiary identity groups, and those might be national groups, for example, which seems to be what's happening in Europe. And then the whole thing is going to fall apart. And I have some sympathy for that, because I think that it's necessary for human beings at an individual level to feel some sort of affinity for the power structures that they find themselves in. And maybe being 1/300 millionth of an entity is to be too much of a non-entity to feel any real affinity for that structure. So that's part of what I think is happening with regards to Brexit. So